Hi, this is Deborah Sable Thornbrew, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate one example of how to set up two different documents and merge them together using Word 2016's Mail Merge features when you want to send the same form letter to a bunch of different people. So what I have on my screen right now is called the main document file. This is the letter that I want to send to a bunch of different people. It's the same letter that I want to send to all of them, but of course each time I mail it out to each person I want it to have their own name and address and their own information in it. So I typed up the letter that I want to say, the information that I want to tell each person, but I have to leave the address and greeting line area specially formatted so that their individual names and addresses can be plugged into each copy of this letter. And Word is going to do all that work for me. Now you can see here that it says address block, and it's got these little brackets on either end, and greeting line with brackets on either end. Those are called merge fields or placeholders for merge fields, and I'm going to explain how you get those and how they're used in just a little bit here. But first let me show you the other document. You need two different documents to run a mail merge because you're merging things together in order to mail it. This document is a separate file, and this is what we call the data file or the data source file. This is the file that contains a list of all the names and addresses of where each copy of the letter is going to be mailed. And there's different ways to create a data source file. You can use an Excel file or an Access database file or an Outlook email file. But in this example, I'm just using a plain Word document with nothing in it except for this table that I created. I inserted a table, and along the first row of the table, I put in what we call column headings. So this first column heading on the left is called first name, and that means under that, in this column will be just the first name of each person. Then next to that, the next column over is the last name of each person, and so on. We've got street address, city, state, zip, and also an additional piece of data called the return date, and you'll see what that's going to be used for in that letter later. But it's important, please note, it is important that when you're creating a data source file, you need to separate each piece of data into its own separate placeholder or column or cell. If you're using a table like I'm using here, then each cell of the table needs to have a separate piece of the information for each person. So if you have a first name and last name, you need to separate those out into two different columns. The street address is by itself in another column. The name of the city is by itself. The state is by itself, and so on. The zip, everything needs to be completely by itself in each column. That way, when you set up the main document with the placeholders, Word will know where to find all this data and plug it in. So I created all of this, I typed it all in, and I saved it as you can save it as a regular Word document, no big deal. And when I go back to the main document file, this is the form letter that I want to send to each person. This is where it's going to find the addresses and the greeting lines for each of those people. Now, this is what it looks like before the mail merge happens. Okay, if you look here, hang on. If you look here, notice that in this last paragraph, there is another placeholder called return date. So you can have different kinds of information plug into a form letter like this. For example, this is a letter that's being sent out to people to ask them to sign release documents when they're selling their house. And each person has to do it and turn it in at a certain date. Each one has their own closing date that they have to send it in by. So the return date is going to be a placeholder so that each person that receives this letter will know the correct date that they have to send it in by. Each one has their own date. So that becomes part of the data, part of the data source, not just their names and addresses. So now what I'm going to do is erase the address block and the greeting line, get rid of those, and show you how to put those in. First, you have to have a blank line to put them in, so I'm going to have a blank line right here. And next, what you need to do is go to the Mailings tab at the top of your screen here, and you'll notice that there are a bunch of commands, but they're grayed out. These are the mirrored fields or placeholder fields that you need to put into this letter, this form letter, but they're grayed out. They're not available. I cannot click on them. That's because there's something else I have to do first. The first thing I have to do is hook this letter up electronically with the list of people's names that I want to have. And that's that table with all those names in it that I showed you. So I'm going to click release, or rather select recipients, and I'm going to say use an existing list. And when you do that, Word automatically opens up a select data source window, and it automatically goes to a location, a default location in Word called My Data Sources. It's actually on your computer. And that's generally not where you're going to find your data source file. Most people don't save it there. They save it someplace else. So you have to go and navigate to where your data source file is. So I have to find where that table file is. So I come in here, and there it is. There's my data source file that I want to use. So I'm going to double click to choose that one. So when you do that, it brings up the insert address block window, and it already has made selections for you. You can change the selections here if you wish. For example, your recipient's name, how that format is going to look in the address area. So I would just leave the default. Don't make any changes to that because it's usually correct when it comes to business letters and that sort of thing. Especially here where it says insert postal address, that's already checked for you, and that means that the name and address will be inserted into the upper left or area of the letter that you're doing. And you can actually see a preview here in this screen here on the right of what that particular letter is going to look like. So this first one has George Lucas, and if you want to go to the next person in the list, Charlie Chaplin, this is what his will look like. James Cameron, that's what his would look like. So this looks right. This looks pretty good. So I'm going to just accept all these defaults. I'm not going to make any changes and just click OK. And there you see the address block. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is move down another line, and I'm going to put the greeting line in. That's where the greeting line is, where you say dear so and so. So I'm going to click up here on the mailings tab. I'm going to click greeting line, and it offers you choices of how you want that to look, and it could say dear and then the person's name, or you could say to or none. Dear is usually pretty accepted in business letters, and you might want to say dear Mr. and Mrs. or dear Josh Randall Jr. or however you want it to lay out. So I would choose probably something like this where it has the first and last name, and I would scroll through the different choices, the different records that I have, to see what they're going to look like. If you don't like that, you might want to just go with the first name only. I've got to find it in the list here. And then that's what the letters greeting line would look like. And that I'll accept that. That looks good. And I'm just going to click OK. So now the greeting line is there, but I need to put a space in between the greeting line and the subject line. So I'm going to press enter once. And so I'm all set. Now if I want to see a preview of what this is really going to look like before I start printing these out and mailing them, I can go up here and click preview results. And so this is one of the first ones that I can see through up here and look at each letter as it's going to print. So as you can see, what happened was each name that was in my table, name and address, got plugged in to where these placeholders were, where the merge fields were. So that's how it works. It all just sort of finds itself. And notice too down here in the last paragraph where it said, I don't know if you remember, but where this placeholder, this merge field said, where it said return date, notice that each return date is different for each person. So this one, which was for James Cameron, this one plugged in his date. And if I go to a different recipient, it'll go move to that person's date, April 3rd. So as long as the dates were part of the data source file and formatted properly, it'll all get plugged in for you automatically. Now to finish the merge, all you have to do is click over here in the upper right, Finish and Merge. You would click that, and the best thing to do would be to click Edit Individual Documents, because when you choose that, it will then, and when you see this come up, just leave it on all. You want to see all of them. Click OK. When you choose that, it will show you what each letter will look like in one file. So as I scroll down through these letters, you'll notice that there are multiple pages. If you look down here in the lower left of the status bar, it tells you there's 10 pages here. And notice too at the top where the title is, letters 2, it'll say letters 1 or letters 2, however many times you've done this. This is a whole separate third new file with the letters already merged together. This is the file you would save and then print out. So if I were to sort of reduce this file and move it out of the way, let me move it down. Notice that my main document, the form letter originally that I opened, is still here. This is, this did not get changed. This is still sitting here. And so is the data source file I was looking at. That's still sitting here also. So I have now 3 files open. I have the data source file, I have the main document file, and I have the actual finished merged file where I took both of those first 2 files and merged them together and created a whole separate third file with multiple copies of the letter, and each one is dated and addressed to each person in that list. So now I can finish it and go ahead and print it out.